My name is Patricia, and this story begins with a house. Not just any house, but a brownstone on Warren Street, nestled between two quiet blocks in New York City. The house is tall, narrow, and carries the kind of history you can feel when you run your hand over the banister. I bought it after years of saving, scraping together tips, double shifts, and every dollar I could set aside. It was not handed to me, not a gift, not a family inheritance. It was mine, because I worked for it. I still remember the day I signed the deed. I sat in a stiff office chair across from a man in a gray suit, my palms damp as he slid the papers across the desk. The closing costs alone were $18,000, more money than I had ever written on a single check. My heart pounded as I signed, but when I walked out with the keys in my hand, I felt taller than the skyscrapers around me. That house was not just walls and windows. It was proof that I had built something on my own terms, in my own name, in America. The house became both sanctuary and workplace. On the ground floor, I turned into my office, a place for ledgers, menus, and endless plans. I stacked shelves with binders labeled in neat black ink. Payroll, vendors, marketing. Upstairs, the rooms were softer. A sunlit kitchen where I experimented with recipes, a small library where my books leaned against one another like old friends, and a balcony that caught the morning light just right. There, with a cup of coffee in hand, I often reminded myself of the road I had traveled to get here. My pride did not stop with the house. A bigger part of my heart belonged to my restaurant in Manhattan, Warren and Birch. It started as a wild idea scribbled in the margins of a notebook and grew into a living, breathing place filled with people, laughter, and the smell of bread baking. I scraped together $60,000 in savings from years of work, late nights waiting tables, early mornings prepping kitchens, and added a $20,000 loan that I paid back within a year. Every chair in that restaurant was chosen by me. Every lamp hung in just the right corner was my decision. The menu, the music, the soft glow of the candles. It was my dream carved into reality. But a restaurant is never only about one person. It is about the people who keep it alive, and I was blessed with a staff that felt like family. There was Rosa, who managed the floor with a smile that made even the hardest customers soften. There was Mateo, who baked bread that filled the whole street with its warmth. And then there was Evan. Evan was younger than me, quick with his hands and quicker with his loyalty. He could carry 3 trays at once without spilling a drop, and when the kitchen was in chaos, he stayed calm. I never saw him as anything but a trusted part of the team. Sometimes, after closing, we sat together with leftover coffee, talking about books or music. He reminded me of a younger brother, someone I wanted to guide, not someone I wanted to marry. But life has a strange way of turning small misunderstandings into great storms. One spring, I traveled abroad to Europe. London was calling me, an invitation from a well-known chef who had tasted my food during a visit to New York. I wanted to learn, to grow, to see what I could bring back home. The flight cost me £1,200, and the hotel near the river another £300. It was simple, not luxurious, but I never needed luxury. What I needed was perspective. The streets of London were cobbled and damp, carrying the smell of rain and bread. I walked along bridges, notebook in hand, jotting down every flavor, every detail, every idea. At small cafes, I spent £25 on dinners of soup and wine, listening to the chatter of voices around me. I sent photos home. The Tower Bridge glowing at night, a basket of fresh scones, the sun falling across the Thames. I wrote to my sister, Lena. I told her I would be home in 2 weeks. I trusted her. I trusted my parents. I thought love was safe while I was away. I thought my restaurant would stand steady, my family unshaken, my life waiting just as I had left it. But beneath the quiet streets of London, a storm was already brewing back in America. While I was wandering along the river, while I was learning and dreaming, my sister was making choices that would change the course of everything. Choices my parents would support. Choices that would blindside me the moment I returned. I did not know it yet. I walked along those London streets with light steps, holding tight to my plans, carrying pride for my house on Warren Street and my restaurant in Manhattan. I thought I knew where the story of my life was headed. I was wrong. While I was in Europe, my phone became a stranger. It buzzed at odd hours with messages from home, each one shorter and stranger than the last. My mother, Margaret, who usually filled her texts with warmth and long advice, wrote only, "Things are changing." My father, Michael, added another note that said, "We're proud of new ties in the family." Nothing more. No explanations. No details. At first, I brushed it aside. My parents were reserved people in their own way. They didn't always share their thoughts fully, and I thought maybe they had taken on a new project or reconnected with an old friend. Still, a part of me felt uneasy. The words were too vague, too rehearsed. I called. Once, twice, 3 times. No one picked up. I told myself they were busy, or sleeping, or caught up in some small-town drama I didn't need to worry about. I told myself these things while walking past the old stone streets of London, the air cool and damp around me. I pushed the unease down into my chest and kept moving. That evening, I sat alone in a corner of a cafe by the river. The bill came to £25, just soup, bread, and wine. I placed the coins carefully on the table and stared at the glass before me. I tried to steady myself with the thought that whatever was happening at home would wait until I returned. In 2 weeks, I told myself I would step back into America, back into my house on Warren Street, back into the kitchen of Warren and Birch, and everything would make sense again. But the truth doesn't wait for a plane ticket. The next morning, my phone lit up with a photo from Lena, my sister. She was standing in a gleaming dining room, chandeliers above her, gold-framed mirrors catching her smile. Beside her stood Evan. My Evan, or rather, the Evan who worked for me, who carried trays at my restaurant, who made jokes in the back kitchen while the rest of us were drowning in orders. His arm was looped around her waist, his tie too tight at his throat. Beneath the photo was a message. We did it. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. I blinked. I stared. I waited for the words to change. But they did not. They sat there like sharp stones in my hand, unmovable and cold. I felt the air leave my chest. I sank down onto the bed of my small hotel room, my suitcase open at my feet, clothes spilling out like a life undone. I read the message again. Then again. We did it. My mind began to race.
Did she mean married?
Engaged? A deal of some kind? And why was Evan standing there, smiling, as if this was the best day of his life? I scrolled quickly through my messages, searching for clarity. My parents had sent another line earlier that morning. My father had written, "We are proud to stand with them." My mother had added, "We're happy you will understand." But I didn't understand. Not at all. My parents had believed it. They had believed that Evan was my fiancé, a wealthy man who owned my restaurant. They had swallowed the lie whole, perhaps even encouraged it. To them, Evan looked like a man who could carry me into a future of money and comfort. And Lena, my own sister, stood at his side as though she had stepped into my life, into my place, wearing the role I never even wanted her to have. But here's the truth. Evan was not my fiancé. He had never been. He was my employee and my friend, and nothing more. He earned $18 an hour plus tips, and on busy nights, I often slipped him extra because he worked harder than most. He was not rich. He was not the owner of Warren and Birch. I was. I paid the rent, signed the checks, dealt with the inspectors, and kept the lights on. Still, I could see how the lie had grown. Evan, always eager to please, always smiling, must have let them believe it. Maybe he liked the attention. Maybe he liked Lena. Maybe he simply didn't know how to stop once it began. But lies, once planted, grow fast. And by the time I saw that photo, it had bloomed into something vast and ugly. I sat on that hotel bed for hours, staring at the screen until it dimmed and went black. My heart was heavy, but not in the way of heartbreak. No, it was heavier, like betrayal. It was not just Evan's part in the lie. It was Lena's. It was my parents who should have known me better than to believe I had handed over my life and my business to someone else. The strangest thing was how small the pain felt at first, like a paper cut across the skin. A thin, quiet line of hurt, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But the more I thought of it, the deeper it cut, seeping into everything. Every laugh I had shared with Lena, every word of encouragement from my parents, every moment of trust one had placed in Evan, it all felt rewritten, tainted by this performance they had carried on without me. I closed the curtains of that little London hotel and lay in the dark, the city humming outside my window. My mind kept circling the same questions. Why would she do this? Why would they let her? Why would Evan agree? There were no answers, only silence. And in that silence, I made myself a promise. I would return to America, and I would find out the truth. Not the lies told in photos and messages, but the real truth beneath them. I didn't yet know the scale of what waited for me. I didn't know that a dinner party was being planned in my absence, or that my name was being spoken as if it belonged to someone else. All I knew was this. Something precious had been stolen, and it wasn't Evan. It was trust, and trust, once broken, is the hardest thing in the world to repair. The day I returned to America, the city felt different. Perhaps it was me who had changed, carrying a heaviness from London back across the ocean, but the streets I knew so well looked sharper, harsher, as though they had been waiting to test me. The taxi wound through the avenues of New York, the glass towers rising like judges above me. My house on Warren Street stood steady, familiar, but I barely paused to breathe inside its walls. There was no time. Word had reached me even before my suitcase was unpacked. Lena had arranged a dinner party. Not just a gathering, but a grand event, the kind where chandeliers drip light like melted gold and waiters glide between tables as if their feet never touch the ground. She had chosen one of the most luxurious restaurants in Manhattan, a place where a single bottle of wine is sold for $400 and no one dares call it excessive. She wanted the world to see her triumph. I knew instantly that I had to go. Not because I wanted to, but because I could not allow the lie to stand unchallenged. I would not let my parents, my friends, or my city believe a story written without me. I dressed with care. A black dress, simple but strong. No glitter, no sequins, just fabric that whispered confidence with every step. I wanted to walk into that room as myself, not as the image my sister had painted of me, weak and absent. When I arrived, the restaurant shimmered with golden light spilling through glass walls. Laughter echoed across the marble floor. The air smelled of roasted lamb and truffle oil, the kind of scent that makes people believe they are living better lives than they really are. I handed my coat to the waiter at the door, but before he could take it, a voice sliced through the hum of conversation. "There's no seat for you here. You can sit on the ground." It was Lena. My sister stood tall at the head of a long table, her lips curled in a smirk. Her dress glittered silver, her hair styled like she was the star of a film. She made sure every guest heard her. The words rolled across the room like broken glass. Some guests chuckled, nervously at first, then louder. Old friends from Chicago shifted in their seats, whispering. My mother lowered her eyes to her lap. My father lifted his glass and sipped, pretending not to notice. And beside Lena stood Evan. He wore a suit that did not fit him properly. The shoulders sagged and the tie was too tight. He looked uncomfortable, but not enough to step away from her side. His hand rested on the back of her chair, his face stiff with forced pride. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I did not show it. I took one breath, long and steady, and let silence be my shield. Then it happened. The guards at the front, men who had seen me countless times during vendor checks and private bookings, looked up and recognized me. One of them stepped forward and shouted, his voice cracking the air like thunder. "Shut up. She is the owner of this restaurant." The room froze. Laughter died mid-breath. Forks paused halfway to mouths. My sister's smile faltered, though she tried to hold it. Evan's hand slipped from the chair. My parents stared as though they were seeing me for the first time. I laughed then, not out of anger, but the kind of laugh that comes when a storm has passed and you realize you are still standing. The sound startled even me, sharp and clean in the golden air. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the floor, and faced Lena directly. You've told a story, I said, my voice calm, steady. But it isn't the truth. Evan is not my fiancé. He never was. He works for me at Warren and Birch. He is my employee and my friend. He is not rich. He is not the owner. I am. I pay him every Friday like I pay the rest of my team. The words landed like stones in water, sending ripples across every face at the table. Some looked shocked. Some looked ashamed. Others looked thrilled at the scandal unraveling before them. Evan's shoulders sagged. He avoided my eyes. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Lena's face twisted, anger and embarrassment colliding in her expression. My mother whispered something I couldn't hear. My father placed his glass down too carefully, the sound of it against the table louder than it should have been. The manager, a man in a crisp suit, hurried over. His eyes darted between Lena and me, unsure of where authority truly lay. "Do you wish to keep the party?" he asked, almost bowing. I shook my head.
No.
"Close it. Charge the room to my business card for the food already served. $2,860, I believe." Gasps rose from the table. Someone whispered, "She's paying?" "Yes," I said firmly, "because the staff should not suffer for the lies of others." I turned to the waiters, their faces pale with confusion. "You've worked hard tonight. None of this is your fault. The tip is $600. Split it fairly." Relief flickered in their eyes, followed by gratitude. They bowed slightly, murmuring thanks. Then I faced the guests. "The evening is over. Please leave." One by one, chairs scraped back. Dresses swished, shoes tapped. Murmurs filled the air as people gathered their coats. My parents stood awkwardly, unsure whether to approach me or avoid me. Evan remained seated for a moment longer, staring down at his plate as though it might offer him salvation. Lena stood rigid, her fists clenched at her sides, fury burning in her eyes. I did not wait for apologies. I did not wait for excuses. I simply turned, handed my coat to the guard who still stood like a soldier, and walked out into the night. The city air was sharp against my face, clean in a way the golden room could never be. I breathed deeply, my laughter from earlier echoing faintly in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt free, not from the lie itself, but from its weight. That night, walking alone down the glittering streets of Manhattan, I understood something clearly. Money, dresses, parties, they were all shadows. Truth was the only thing that could not be faked. And I carried that truth in my own name, in my own work, in the house and restaurant I had built with my own hands. The dinner party had ended, but my story had only just begun. The truth spread quickly. It traveled down the avenues of New York, slipped into whispered conversations over coffee, and leapt across phone lines back to Chicago, where our relatives lived. I did not need to tell the story. Others did it for me. She was the owner all along, they said. Her sister thought she was marrying wealth, but she was only marrying a shadow. The gossip rolled faster than I could keep track of. People I had not heard from in years sent messages. Old classmates, neighbors, acquaintances from church. Some congratulated me for standing strong. Others wanted to pry, to know details I would never give. But the truth had already done its work. It had cut through the lies and left Lena exposed. One evening, just a week after the dinner party, I heard a knock on the door of my house on Warren Street. It was past midnight, the city quiet outside, only the hum of taxis far off in the distance. I opened the door, and there she was, Lena. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes red from crying, her silver dress exchanged for a plain sweater and jeans. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of her choices had shrunk her. She begged. She wept. She told me she was sorry, that she had not loved Evan so much as she had loved the dream he represented. She confessed that she had seen him as a ladder, not a partner, a way to climb into the life she thought I had built but refused to share with her. "I married a dream, not a man," she whispered, her voice cracking in the night air. But apologies, once delayed, lose their power. I stood there listening, but the place in my heart where forgiveness should have been was empty. She had mocked me in public, laughed at me in front of strangers, and stolen the trust one had carefully built. Those wounds were not healed by tears on my doorstep. Within a week, Lena filed for divorce. Papers were drawn up swiftly, her marriage ending as quickly as it had begun. The man she thought was her escape turned out to be nothing more than an employee clinging to a story. As for Evan, he disappeared from the city for a time. No one saw him in the usual bars or on the subway routes he often took after shifts. A month later, I received a single envelope at the restaurant. Inside was a scrap of paper with just one line scrawled in blue ink. "I'm sorry. I was foolish." Nothing else. I folded the paper, placed it in a drawer, and sent him his final paycheck, $940, including overtime he had never claimed. It was my way of closing the door without slamming it. I did not hate him, but I could not keep him close. My parents tried harder than anyone to mend the cracks. They called me almost daily, sometimes together, sometimes separately, their voices heavy with guilt. My mother urged me to forgive Lena, reminding me that blood is thicker than water. My father pleaded with me to see past the betrayal, to remember childhood summers and holidays. But I could not. Forgiveness is not something you hand out like a receipt. It must come from the heart, and my heart would not bend. "I cannot give what I do not feel," I told them. "I will not pretend." So I left Lena alone, just as she had left me alone in that glittering dining room when she mocked me. I did not return her calls. I did not answer her letters. She was a stranger now, and strangers do not sit at my table. In the quiet that followed, I returned to what I knew best, work. Warren and Birch steadied me. The rhythm of the restaurant was a balm. The hiss of pans, the scent of bread rising, the clink of glasses. My staff, those who had witnessed the chaos from the sidelines, rallied behind me. Rosa managed the floor with sharper focus than ever. Mateo baked with pride, his loaves selling out nightly. And I, for the first time in months, felt in control again. But ambition does not stay still. Within a year, I opened a second place by the river. It was smaller, humbler, with a narrow bar and simple food that spoke more of comfort than luxury. I invested $45,000 into its bones, paint, plumbing, permits. For chairs, I scoured secondhand shops, buying them for $12 apiece, sanding and polishing them myself until they gleamed with quiet dignity. The nights there were different from Warren and Birch. They were softer, slower. The kind where couples lingered long after dessert, their hands brushing across the table, or where old friends raised glasses and shared stories. I often stood near the bar, watching, listening, the hum of voices wrapping around me like music. The best nights were never the loudest ones. They were the nights when the air felt warm and safe, when forks rested gently against plates, and the weight of truth hung in the room, invisible but steady. My guests didn't know the full story, but they tasted it in the care of the food, in the patience of the service. They felt it in the quiet strength of the woman who owned the place. Sometimes, guests would ask me why I smiled when others boasted about money. They would brag about salaries, houses in the Hamptons, and watches worth more than cars. And I would smile, not out of envy, not out of scorn, but because I knew something deeper. I would tell them, I went to Europe and learned a recipe. But when I came back to America, I learned about people. One lesson makes soup. The other makes a life. And that is where I chose to leave it, not in bitterness, not in revenge, but in truth. I kept my house. I kept my restaurant. I kept my name. And I kept my quiet, knowing that sometimes the greatest strength is not in holding others close, but in knowing when to let them go.